Hey, this is Monica. I am doing my communications assignment for the Martin Luther King weekend, which was last weekend. Today's actually the 21st of Saturday. So I'm answering the question, do you support net neutrality and attempts to bridge the digital divide? And then why or why not? So first let's talk about net neutrality. To define the principle of net neutrality, this is the idea that an internet provider will treat everyone's data neutrally. That it's the idea that the internet provider won't get to choose whose data gets to be faster or slower, whose sites are blocked or allowed through, and so on and so forth. So some of the ways that this has played out have led to unfair privileges for certain people or companies. Here are some examples. So big banks are willing to pay extra money to get their stock bids in faster. Some hedge funds will actually pay hundreds of millions of dollars for a speed advantage that ranks in the milliseconds. So that amount of time gives them advantage in their running of their stocks. So this is only one example of the power that internet companies hold if allowed to control the speed of the services differently from one customer to another. So here's another example. The cable and telephone companies are the ones who are also in the video business themselves. For example, how would it affect video streaming? By the way, video streaming can consume more than 50% of all US bandwidth at certain times. So this is a big business. So if Comcast can slow down or throttle streaming from Netflix or Hulu or YouTube so that people are more inclined to consume content via their services, the cable content, that affects people. So if you pay Comcast for your bandwidth and then subscribe to Netflix, is it fair that Comcast can then deliberately disrupt or slow down your Netflix watching just to influence you to stay with the cable services that they offer? I don't think so. I wonder if this could be compared to an electricity company that also owns a company that manufactures blow dryers. Should the electricity company be able to rig the delivery of the electricity so that it slows down and works in a substandard way if you are using a competitive blow dryer? Whether or not it's legal, it's just not nice. So let's move on and talk a little bit about net neutrality. About the digital divide now. I have stronger feelings on this one even than net neutrality. So the idea of the digital divide refers to the growing gap between the underprivileged members of society, especially poor, rural, elderly, handicapped portions of the population who don't have access to computers or the internet or anything that accesses the internet, and the wealthy middle class. The gap between these underprivileged members and the wealthy middle class people living in urban and suburban areas who do have access. Some of the articles that I read on this issue spoke only and exclusively about Americans, but I can guarantee that it affects, this is something that affects people globally. For example, I 10 years ago traveled to Zambia, and where there was internet access in every hotel I'd ever been in the United States. In Zambia, you had to walk to internet cafes where the services were incredibly slow. I couldn't send pictures without using half an hour or so per picture. So this is a global issue. So some of the factors that contribute to the digital divide in the United States is, first of all, is education. Those who have higher levels of education are more likely to have access and own computers and have internet services. Income obviously is almost common sense. If you are living hand to mouth, you are not going to purchase a computer. Whereas if you are in the higher economic levels, you'll have that extra money to buy the devices that access the internet. There's also, interestingly enough, a wide gap along racial lines. A white household is more than twice as likely to have a computer and access to internet as a Hispanic household in the United States. So the next question is, why is this a big issue? So here is one example that I have experienced in my own family that tells why it's a big issue. So my daughter, as a teenager, set out to find a job. Of course, she was going to be focusing on those entry-level jobs that didn't require any specific training. And as she walked from business to business, well over half of the jobs she was attempting to apply for didn't have the option of filling out a paper application, instead giving her instructions on how to apply online. Now, if we're looking at the jobs that those in the lowest economic statuses are attempting to get, not having access to a computer just shut them out of over half of the jobs. So Minion Clyburn of the Federal Communications Commission within the United States points out that there are 45 states with frameworks where 1 in 5 public assistance programs are online. So you need access to the internet to access these public assistance programs. The opportunity of a fixed broadband connection is so much greater by way of speeds that even having just a cell phone that connects to the internet is not enough to give a person the ability to fill out the forms, transfer files that they would need to apply for these services. She mentioned that the biggest problem to internet access is in the poorest areas. And what happens there is these areas, the companies don't have any incentive to invest in the infrastructure so that the people living there are able to access the internet. So if the hardware's not there, then obviously it's not going to be taught within the schools. So the education isn't there, and you have all of these compounding issues that limit people's access to internet to be able to apply for services or receive jobs. So I see this as an issue of social justice, and being a peace and justice studies major, I'm an integrated studies major with that as one of my emphases. All of these things that put divisions between those in lower economic status and those in higher economic status, where those who are in the higher just have more and more advantage and those who are in the lower have less and less advantage, really speak to ethics for me of equity for all people. So the New York Times talked about the ways that within the United States we could help to start closing the digital divide. One was to create more and support the existing community access centers. So in my area, I could walk to the library and have access to the internet. Now that's kind of limited because there are time that your time frame allowed on the computers is 1 hour. So if you are applying for jobs and you have 1 hour and then have to get off and wait for your turn to come around again, that puts you behind. Another is education from a young age. If you're not educated in the use of technology, you have less ability to learn those skills as an adult than if you just learn them in the public education system. And there needs to be a change in public attitude, that this is a necessity rather than a luxury. This is the way the world runs nowadays. So, thank you very much, and logging off now.